If you're having trouble with sound, please let me. Is that better? Let's hope that is. Oh, okay. Well, that's always nice to know. Can you hear me now? Give me some hearts if you can hear me. You can hear me? Okay, excellent. So let me start all over. Do me a favor. One person. I'm going to designate. Heather, do me a favor and share this into the group, please, so that nobody else has to share it, and whoever may not even realize I've gone live and might need this message. This is crucial. Communication is important, imperative to all of our lives. You can hide in a convent, you can hermit away, it doesn't matter. Communication is key. And the first communication starts with self. So no matter what relationship you're within someone else, with other people, it doesn't serve to be unkind, because you have to look at how are you treating yourself. If you're hyper critical, because this is where criticism comes in, with yourself, if you're hyper critical with yourself, I'm a subscriber so I can speak from experience on this, chances are you're going to be hyper critical with others, which is why it's so much more important that you be mindful of your thoughts, mindful of your own criticism, internal dialogue, in order to recognize how you're also communicating it outwardly toward those around you, whether they're the people you love or the people you don't even know. There is a distinct difference. We tend to be more critical with our closest friends and family than we are with others we don't know. Well, interestingly enough, why do we do that? Because we fall into habits, we fall into patterns, we just assume that person is supposed to understand where we're coming from and we shouldn't have to filter it or candy coat it. But the reality is all relationships should be on the same level. Treat everybody kindly with respect in your words, your tone. Tone is a huge one, people. If you've got something bubbling up inside and it comes out in the wrong way, and then it will be received in the wrong way, and doesn't matter what the intention was behind the words. I'm just saying. If you change up your tone, if it's an elevated octave, or it's just attacking, but you might not see it. And the reason you won't see it is because, well, go figure. You're just saying it like it is, and that's just how you are. And the mind, the ego, the will, it doesn't see what others can see from the outside. And what somebody else receives as the message is real and true for them. It doesn't serve to turn around and say, well, that's not how I saw it. Well, of course not. And it also doesn't serve that it wasn't my intention, when in the end, the result is clear. If the other person felt a certain way as a result of your communication, then you need to take it back and ask, how can I improve upon this? Of course, you're not going to know unless someone communicates it back to you. And so this is an interesting conversation to have, because when communication comes up, people don't like to be criticized. Is it true or not? Does anybody out there like to be criticized? I don't mind receiving feedback, but when someone criticizes me and it feels like an attack, it no longer feels constructive. Now I feel like like an animal backed up into a corner. Can anybody relate to this? If someone comes at you and there's no kindness in the words or the tone, and keeps turning it around on you, the reality is that is something both people can, sometimes it's necessary to walk away from, because it's going to be hurtful and it's unkind, and someone's going to get hurt in the process. And sometimes you need to be the one to say, you know what, I can't have this conversation right now. And you have to notice what bubbles up for you. For me, if it comes in a certain way, I've told you in my previous videos, it comes in my stomach, it comes in my gut, and it's emotional. It's about the fact that I expressed the video before with shits and giggles. This isn't no giggling matter. The reality is growing up, I wasn't taught how to properly communicate my emotions. My coping mechanisms didn't work properly. And as a result, I hold on to things in my stomach, if I feel over-criticized, I feel like, I can't eat. If I feel like that animal that's been backed into a corner, this mind's already going. I'm already hypercritical. But when someone attacks me on top of everything else, and here's the thing, I know my truth. I know where I can improve, but there are times if someone attacks you, it's one thing if someone gave me feedback, but if someone attacks you in a certain manner, it doesn't matter. A lot of times you got to look at it from the perspective with compassion of, is this really about me? Or is it about the other person who I'm perceiving as attacking me? Because quite often we attack outward when something inward is not functioning properly. When we're out of alignment with ourselves, the first people to suffer are the people closest to us if we happen to be in that mode of impatience, inner dialogue, criticism. Well, how easy is it to project that onto another person when you're already not in a good space within? So when you have a conversation with somebody, it's one thing. When you find yourself attacking someone other than yourself, when you've already been upset within, it's a question of, are you here or you are up in here? Again, I've talked about this before. I don't think it'll ever get old. I don't care who we are. I can always listen to my own advice, my own reflection, because this is what I'm sharing with you. Right now, what I'm sharing with you is the fact that I myself have lived a very hypercritical, mental, active mind. And I used to be just as easily attacking on the exterior as I was on the interior. When you meet somebody who is bitter, is completely unkind, and you think, oh, what's their problem? That's an amplification. And I guarantee from my own knowing of myself that if I see someone out on the outside emanating this bitterness, this dis-ease, because really that's what it is. The discomfort within, when it comes out and you can sense it and you can see it and you can taste it and you can touch it and you feel it in the air, chances are what's going on inside is even worse. And so whenever I reflect upon conversations and dialogues with others, especially my loved ones, because those are the ones that really make me most upset if I receive criticism or I feel attacked. And see, I grew up with my father being very critical. I grew up with my mother being very critical. Though you may not even see that to meet them, but it wasn't easy to process. And so I set a high bar, a high standard for myself. And in my life, I often would project that out on others. So if someone was that I loved, because that's how we operate, right? You care, so you want the best for your loved ones. And you say that I want to help you. You say I want the best for you. But are you just trying to make them come up to what you consider your level as if you're considering that they're down on a lower level, or that they need to do something because you see their potential, versus a kind way to communicate and give feedback? Because no matter how good your intentions, if your tone and your dialogue is attacking and nasty, it will never be received. In fact, you'll push people away more often than not. And I say this from my own personal experience because I pushed a lot of people in my life away during a lot of my life. And I realized that I was being hypercritical of them because I wanted them to be better and I saw their potential, but that wasn't loving. That was holding them higher than where they were ready to go. And I didn't deliver myself in the kindest of ways. In fact, I learned that from my parents, because that's how my parents operated. My dad with come on, Lori, you got to start practicing that flipping action. Because, if you don't get a degree and a good paying job, you're going to be working at Burger King. Now, some may find that funny, but do you know, for a young child, that's traumatic. For my sister, it was traumatic. And mostly because of the hypercritical, snide, nasty way of insinuating that she wasn't good enough to do better with or without a degree. And so when we have these moments and we don't stop to breathe, people will shut down more often. And this is what my experience has been, that when I've been around negative people in my life, I've seen how it affected me and how it dragged me into a negative space. And I proceeded to also become negative with others as a result. The more you surround yourself with uplifting, inspiring people, what are you going to absorb? Right? So you need to surround yourself with people who are going to make you feel better about yourself. Thank you, Amanda. If somebody is attacking and nasty and mean, now don't get me wrong, they need uplifting, but they need somebody who can hold that space for them. And sometimes the balance is hard to maintain. So this is why it's so important to find mentors and people to surround yourself and to look up to, because we can always grow, we can always move forward. And if we're constantly surrounded by other people who aren't uplifting us, we're just going to be stuck in those old patterns and we're not going to grow. Which is why it is so important for me that I continually grow and work and spend time with my yoga studio, because my teachers are there. I have beautiful people that I can look up to, who have been through what I've been through, and will hold me accountable for who I am. You need somebody who's already been through what it is you're working on. To hang out with somebody who hasn't even reached a level of awareness and expect them to be the one who lifts you up is actually, I've seen it actually with, unfortunately, my dad. He hangs out with people who make him feel better about himself because they're in worse off conditions, and it gives him something to, look at me, I'm in a better situation than that person, and I can't understand. And why would you even try to wrap your head around someone else's life? So, and he's hypercritical. Like I said, I listen to my dad complain about other people who don't contribute, who don't matter, who aren't on that level. But what would be serving would be for him to hang with somebody who actually could teach him, allow him his growth, allow him ways to improve upon, and give him something positive to speak of. That is why, like I said, I know that for me, doing my seva, donating and volunteering my time to serve at the yoga studio, I'm not just receiving, I'm not just giving actually, I'm not just serving as someone to hold space for others, but I'm also receiving at the same time. And I constantly grow and learn through that environment about myself and about others. And others teach me, because guess what? We are a reflection of one another. And so if I'm engaging in conversation with somebody, I'm always learning about myself. And today I realized one of my key things is that if I feel that I can't say something, it bundles up more and more in my stomach, and I cannot eat. I can't even take the time to eat, because at that point my emotions, when we're emotional, number one, we need to be drinking water. If you go to eat something, don't eat anybody, by the way. If you go to eat something, it's not going to process well in your system, your digestive tract. Now, we bounce back quicker when we meditate, because meditation allows us to find the neutrality, come back to, okay, it took me out of my space, I got emotional and I got upset, but now I can come back to the center, and sometimes that takes a little bit of time. But with meditation, I found I'm able to recalibrate quicker. But see, for me, I need to move my body, I need to be outside. That's another way I've been able to reground myself, regroup, and catch my thoughts and see where I'm at. I'm not perfect, but guess what? I've never said I was. And people don't always see me the way I interact with other people. You know, my dad, when I go out with him in public, whether it's at the market or something else, he gets very impatient. He's ready to go the minute we get there. And it was like that when we traveled in Portugal. I love to meet and greet and interact and engage with people, to hear about their lives. I love, absolutely love hearing stories from people who are older, to hear what it was like, to hear, I'm learning. Every time I go to the market, y'all, I love to take a little bit more time and see if there's something new that I haven't yet tried. And so I'm very appreciative when I get to go to the market, and tomorrow will be a market day. Because when I go to the market, there's always something new there. Last year, I don't know how many greens I learned about and got to eat. And I found my purslane. So this weekend, we're looking for purslane again. I'm constantly looking to grow, to expand, to develop, and to absorb all of this wondrous, this life. But when my emotions get triggered, and it brings me back to my childhood again, and this idea that hypercritical, yeah, I've been all my life, and that's hard. And when your loved ones are not kind to you and attacking, but claiming, well, I feel like this or I feel like that, and they're not receptive to listening to you as well, it's tough. It's really tough. And I'm going to tell you, if your relationships aren't open enough to dialogue, not monologue, because quite often the baiting comes in when someone's upset, they blast you, attack you. They don't want to hear what you have to say, but yet they ask you a question as if it's relevant. And the moment you start to answer, they attack you on top of it. And it's like, whoo, I got caught up in again. This is not healthy. And if you catch yourself doing it, for example, somebody asks you why you did something, which is totally irrelevant, because why we do anything? We come from different filters and belief systems and experiences. So to even try to explain why you do something, sometimes that person's not necessarily open to receiving, because their perceptions, their experiences, their belief systems are on a totally different level. So even if you explain yourself, it may not be received because they're stuck in that, well, I should be, if you explain it to me, you're going to explain it to me on my level, but that doesn't happen. To understand someone is to stand under them. And if the other person is not receptive, then it's a pointless conversation. And that's baiting, asking somebody why they do things the way they do it, and then turn around and wait, attack. Or if you proceed to explain to somebody, in this moment, this upset me. Have you ever had it happen that when you brought something up to somebody, and I grew up with this, and this was actually a very old pattern in my family, and it still exists, that when someone turns around and says, you upset me because your tone, I felt attacked, I felt like you weren't listening, and then I'm walking on eggshells. It's very quick. It's a passive-aggressive thing when someone turns around and says, well, this is how I feel when you do this. But you know what? We're not in that moment right then and there. In this moment, we're right here with the person, and we're hearing them being very vulnerable. Whenever someone shares with you something they're feeling about a situation and the way that communication has just occurred, listen to them first. Don't react, don't respond. Listen with compassionate ears, because it takes a lot for someone to speak up and share, this is how I feel in this moment, and this is what came through. Because it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable, okay, people? If someone is willing to trust you enough to tell you, this is how I feel in this moment, don't take it personal. They're sharing with you a vulnerable, emotional aspect of themselves in the moment. The best you can do is listen. If you can hug them or hold them, if they're open to it, that's great. But not everybody is ready in that moment either. But just honor what you're hearing, because that's their truth. It's not how you intended them to receive it. That's totally irrelevant at that point, because they're feeling something and the intention is irrelevant. What they're feeling is something that is vulnerable and they've opened up, and it takes true trust to be able to do that. And this is the key to relationships and communication. If there is no trust that I can say something to you and you're going to listen, then that's the breakdown of most relationships. You know, the idea that I'll just be quiet and I won't say anything because I'll be afraid if it sets someone off. It's unhealthy, people. You have to establish and maintain a level of trust. Safety and security. Many of us didn't have that growing up. The idea that even just sharing something might have been teased or attacked or played with or held against you. You've had that happen before? When someone turns around and changes it so that every time something gets brought up, they bring up that trigger, that emotion that you were vulnerable enough to share. See, when we come into relationships with, whether it's your personal partner, your best friend, anybody in your life, we've opened ourselves up to sharing some of us that, you know, a side of us that we may not share with anybody else. And so to establish trust means to allow the person to be vulnerable and authentic in their personal power. And that takes a lot. And to really harvest and cultivate, again, self-love is one thing. If you don't have it with yourself, you're not going to be able to share it with another. And that trust has to begin with self. If you're impatient, if you're hypercritical and you attack outwardly, because that's just, you can't control that and contain it. You got to contain it to claim it. Then how can you hold the space for another? How can you claim to love someone if you're unable to allow them to feel safe and able to reveal themselves in their rawness, in their fullness? What is not easy for me to begin with is to sit with myself, which is why I have to have my daily meditation in my practice. And that's why I journal. I'm very aware of many areas that I have to work on. I don't need to explain myself to anybody, although I got to give y'all this one. Here's the irony. Sometimes people feel that you need to explain yourself, or that you need to give examples of something in your life to prove something. I don't even know what, because a lot of times I've heard things like, well, when have you done this? And I'm sitting there going, I didn't know I had to be keeping track or I had to be keeping score. And so therefore, a lot of stuff eludes me because I'm not trying to clutter up my mind with, you know, like I called it the lists. If you've seen some of my videos, you know, the list of keeping score and keeping track of when you've done things. Maybe I need to be holding a merit journal. Maybe I need to keep track, but you know what? It's just way too much up on here. I try to focus on constantly improving and bettering myself, recognizing who I am and how I can be a better person. And I'm constantly able to do that. We all are. There is no such thing as the inability to grow or evolve in our lives. My life hasn't been perfect. Has anybody's? Perfectionism is again in the mind, and then we can never even achieve it by listening to our own mind, right? And you know, Amanda, explaining ourselves sometimes is at our own demise. And I found that because if we have to run around in life explaining ourselves to people, what does that say about us? It's a question of self-worth and self-love. And so I go back to, and this is what it reminded me about again. And I went on this like a few weeks ago when I was expressing how when I sit with my truth, my personal truth, my inner power, my knowing, I don't feel the need to explain myself. But see, when you're in certain relationships with your best friend, with your partner, with your family, with the closest people to you, and someone asks you to explain something, we oblige that. What is the word oblige? We feel obligated, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean it's necessary, but a lot of times we will oblige it because we care enough and we believe they really want to know. So this is the key. Now, I want you to all consider this. When you're in communication, it's hard to discern if you're being baited. And I say baited because it's like hook, line, and sinker. Did someone throw you something to pull you up and get you caught on a hook? If someone truly wants you to explain it with authenticity, not to try to attack you more, because a lot of times that's what baiting is throwing you something, asking you to explain yourself so they can feel validated in the fact that they've just attacked you on top of that. So quite often, this is violent communication, by the way, for those of you who don't understand what that is. When you feel attacked by someone, and I'm not saying we're all perfect, we've all had it, because we have. I know I have. I had this old pattern because that's what my parents were like. It was let's scream at each other because I want to be heard. Let's get the last word in because it's all about, exhibiting our power, right? I'm better than you. I'm stronger than you. Because you feel you have to prove something outside of yourself. You haven't really accepted and honored and allowed yourself to just be with who you are. So self-love and self-worth comes in the form of knowing you don't have to explain yourself to anybody. If you know your truth, there's no need to express and explain where you're coming from on anything. And so, for example, if someone asked you, well, give me an example of when you've done this or done that or done this or done that. It's like, wait a minute here. And you feel like, oh my gosh, why am I being asked to do? I can't come up with an example. Or maybe you can. A lot of times, well, that might be another thing. A lot of times I found that list explanation is totally unserving. It doesn't really matter. Or the keeping score list is really what I'm talking about. Like with my dad, and I used to do a lot of things, and I didn't keep a list. And then he'd proceed to turn around and say things, and I said this in another video. Well, I did this for you to feel significant, to feel important, because his self-worth and self-love was so low that he felt like the only way I can feel significant to you is if I show you or tell you what I've done for you, as opposed to me just recognizing and loving him as he is. And I do love my dad as he is, right? So, you know what though, Marlene? Honestly, I've lived alone for a long time. And so with all the teachings, all the trainings I've done, all the reading, all the research, all the personal work I've done on myself, I'm going to tell you right now, the real work is putting it into practice, is integrating into your life. I don't care how happy you are alone, and I was. You want somebody else out there in your life, close to you, to poke you, prod you, to provoke you, to also to show you how much you've learned and how you apply it to your life. See, the thing is relationship. It's what this life is about. Everything is about relationship. And the first relationship, as I speak about, is always going to start with yourself. It doesn't matter if you can go out in public and get along with people, or maybe you want to be a hermit because you don't want to be bothered with people. Well, the reason we don't want to be bothered with others is because they show us who we are. And so relationship is key, and being vulnerable enough to allow someone else to mirror back to you what it is you may or may not like. Because without the churning, without the rubbing, how can you shine bright like a diamond? And so even though you may think it's easier to be alone, you're just stunting your own growth. And that's what I knew as I had done these years of being celibate, being single. You know what? It's not even about being in a relationship, whether it be physical or non-physical, emotionally attached or unattached. It's all relevant. If someone's in your space, you're living with somebody, you have to learn not only to speak up, but allow yourself to be seen, and allow the other person to be seen too, and to see them. There's a lot of things we can claim we see in another person, but you know, how much of it is it that you're seeing in yourself projected onto the other person? I see myself in everybody, and the reason I see myself in everybody is because I know my shit, and I accept and own my shit. Yes, I'm saying it. There is nothing wrong with my shit. I've had to work and live with it all this time. I'm constantly working to grow and to evolve. And I'm rewriting my story every day as I live, every day as I speak. Every moment is an opportunity to improve. And I see that. To me, that's an open portal. I used to be the one who would just immediately jump into argument because it was easy to jump into argument. And yeah, I can yell, but it didn't get me anywhere, and it certainly didn't get us anywhere, whoever it might have been in my relationships or my friendships, because I had a lot of friendships that were like that too. But those were opportunities to look at the situation and say, is this me? What's this unhealthy situation I'm in? Is it about what's going on inside? What is going on around me? All of it's inside of us. You wouldn't see it outside of yourself if it wasn't already within you. So you can't ever point a finger at somebody else and say, you do this, because you always got 3 pointing back at yourself. If you truly want to grow, you want to soften yourself and look at your inner dialogue. I set a pretty high standard, a pretty high bar on my own personal expectations of myself, right? And so it was easy in the past to expect others to why can't people do this? Like, why can't I get it? Why can't someone else get it? You can't operate like that, people. The idea that you think you have all the answers, none of us do. I don't. I can't tell you. If you ask me for my advice, consultation, I can only tell you from my perspective, from where I've been. I will never give you advice unless you're asking for it and willing to accept and allow it in. I know how I was. And even still, if someone's willing to give me advice, I would really appreciate that I'm asking for it. But when I feel attacked, that's not advice. If someone comes at me telling me all these things that I do wrong and that I'm a certain type of person, well, is that really about me? If there's anger behind those words, somebody needs to go back and look at it and say, where did this originate? Why am I so impatient with them that I can't even hold the space for them and make them feel safe and secure for them to respond? And that it's become a barrage, a monologue of just one person, one-sided. See, there's 3 truths to every conversation of 2 people. There's, we'll say his, hers, his, hers, hers. And then there's the neutral, nobody, anybody. The reality is there's always going to be your perception, your perceived beliefs and experiences and everything you've been through. So when you come into dialogue with another person, you need to step back and ask yourself, is this kind? Is it compassionate? Is it true? Is it relevant? And am I coming from my heart space or my head space? Because this head space will ruin things left and right. How do I know? I know very well. And my delivery in my past was not the kindest. The best example I can give was to my friend Tyler, who, when I was a sophomore in high school, was excited about going to flight school. That was the decision he made, and he was troubled. Back then they called it manic depressant. Now they call it bipolar. Coming from my background, instead of saying, that's great, I'm really excited for you, which is what I would say today. Looking back, he taught me that not everybody can take what would be considered the violent communication, it wasn't criticism, it wasn't kind. What it really was is my dad's pattern coming through me with the flipping of the burgers similarly. That instead of saying, I'm really happy for you, I'm grateful to hear that you found something you're excited to do, and I support you in that. Instead, you know what I said to him? I said, what are you talking about? You know you're not going to do it. Because that's how my dad was. Instead of giving us positive feedback or positive reinforcement, we actually got the negative reinforcement growing up. It was the, you know you're not going to do that, which for me, you know how I interpreted it? Because I'm fiery, I'm a Leo. You tell me I can't do something, I'll be like, fuck you, yes I can, and watch me. Yes, that's exactly the language I would use, and that's exactly how I feel about it. If you tell me I can't do something, I tell you what, I'm the first person. My ego, my will is so strong that I'll be the first person to say, watch me. And I'm serious, watch me. And I'm not saying that served me well, by the way, over the years. I'm just saying that was the pattern that I grew up with. And with my dad giving me negative dialogue, negative feedback like that, the little poking and the prodding, that wasn't very kind and didn't feel real good at the time. I mean, because what did that really do? It really kick-started me into, let me show my dad. Let me prove myself. Again, this goes back to self-worth. That's why I'm saying it's not necessarily any healthier. This is an unhealthy pattern. Tell somebody they can't do something, and they're going to try to prove to you they can because they care about your opinion. They care what you say. They think, you think they matter more than you proving to yourself. So you're going to set out to do it to prove them. Thank you, Sandy. Because that's what I'm gleaning just saying it. Maybe I didn't say it to myself before, but the idea that even though my dad would say, you're not going to do that, I can't, he would smile because he knew he had me hook, line, and sinker. That was a baiting in itself because that was the pattern. He knew that in the back of his mind, if anybody's going to prove it to me, it's going to be her because I'm the oldest and I've always proven myself. Again, it's not a healthy pattern to get into. And proving yourself to someone else should not be your motivation. If anything, it should be coming from here, because all of that for me was up in here. And so unhealthy relationships, again, cultivating and harvesting that self-love is the most important relationship you're ever going to have. If you feel you need to prove yourself to someone else, then you're selling yourself to someone else, is really what you're doing. If you feel you need to explain yourself to someone, then a lot of that's going to be coming from a place of inauthenticity and disalignment. You're not aligned with your heart and your soul. Your heart and soul knows. Nobody else needs to. The personal strength, the personal power, you already have that. It's just trusting in it and knowing it, knowing your truth, knowing your own personal value. I spend a lot of my life looking for others to validate me and make me feel valuable. All I want to do now, people, is just laugh and have fun. I'm so over the seriousness. I want to have fun because when I was a little girl, having fun was really like where my joy was. And things stopped being fun after a certain point in my life. And I, over the years, tried to re-inject laughter in various forms. And it hasn't been easy because not everybody gets me. Not everybody gets the humor. And so that's why it's a precious relationship that I have with Tom, that somebody can laugh at me and just crack up just looking at me without even knowing that he's made me feel better just because he laughed at something that I internally didn't think anybody else would get. It's not even validation that I need, but boy, does it feel good. And to me, that's a special relationship. And that no matter what, relationships are going to have their ups and downs. That I know that there's more ups than there'll ever be downs. But the key, and the thing I find that is the most valuable, is having a partner who is conscious of their communication, aware of their own inner angst and dialogue, who is willing to do the work just as much. When you are with others, if you can at least be with others and you're able to hold that space for another person, you're going to find it will be reciprocated. It's the patience you have with yourself first that's going to radiate out for those others around you. And the more that you do your own inner work, you're doing it for others too. It's why I say when I rise, you rise, because you're never doing anything for yourself. It's this interaction. It's a constant play of life. That the more you show up for you, the more you're doing it for others too. The more you're kind and compassionate to yourself, others will actually reciprocate and be kind to you. But they'll also find the kindness and compassion for themselves eventually along the way. We can never know when that's going to be. We may never know. We may never see it. But let me tell you, the blessing is in knowing that you're doing the best you can for you first. that no matter what's going on all around you, if you can just sit with that chaos, like I said yesterday, pay attention to the birds. The birds are up there and they are riding out the storm. They're hovering and riding those winds, those, you know, they're not trying to go against it. They're not trying to stay with it. They're just allowing. That's the most beautiful, beautiful example of being the calm within the chaos. And see, again, like I said yesterday, when the fear bubbles up, you have to go through it to know you're capable of it, and that you will come out the other end a better person. So this morning, and I was in a space, I was in a really good space actually, and just trying to continue doing some things. And I had a moment, and stuff came up, and my emotions got triggered, and I almost didn't even want to say anything. But I stepped into it with courage and a little trepidation and fear, because I know I'd seen a pattern before, and I knew, you know, what in the past, the reason I hadn't said anything was because I felt like I'd be attacked, that it wouldn't be listened to, that it wouldn't be held sacred, like I said, that I didn't have the safe space, that it would be a baiting of answering. And when I did, I'm glad I did, because you know what? The reality is it's my truth, and that's all I can do. I'm very sensitive right now. I'm very sensitive most of the times. I had to double check if I was still in my arc line, my moon center. Ladies, let me tell you should really check into this stuff. If you really want me to, I'll do a video on it, but I have my pendulum, which I use my necklace actually, and I ask it what's my yes and what's my no. And the other night, I'm probably coming out of the arc line, but the other night I was testing it, and I sometimes know, just know. The arc line is when we're in our arc line, which is the hairline, you know, the halo. It's when we're most sensitive, we're most in our authenticity, which, you know, sometimes it's hard, and I don't necessarily always want to speak up, but like I said last week, I really need to work on expressing my emotions better. It doesn't mean I need to get upset and act out on emotions. No, it's just expressing that in this moment I feel really vulnerable and sharing myself and what it is that's happening within me. And that right now, maybe I'm not receiving what it is that was said to me the way it was intended to be received, but it's the best I can do, and that's where I'm at. And the most I can ask is that you recognize that this is personal and true for me. It doesn't reflect upon you other than the fact that maybe it's something that needs to be looked at within you. And that was tough. Mostly because, you know, it comes up, the fear of abandonment, people. You're afraid that when I say something, it'll push someone away. You're afraid that if I express my truth and what's really going on within me, that they'll not love you anymore. They won't stick around, they'll leave. That they won't trust you enough to share and speak with you. And so nobody should be walking on eggshells is really what I'm talking about. It takes two people to work on communication. You can do it all. You can be the perfect communicator, but if the other person isn't willing to make adjustments or, breathe, right? Breathe into it. That life force prana. Recognize, again, always ask, is this coming from here or is this coming from here? Because chances are, whenever it's going to be coming from here, it's going to be well received. It's how we communicate. 10% of miscommunication is coming from the tone of the voice, right? No, that's 90%, 80%. I got that wrong. Don't listen to that. The majority of the time, it's how we communicate it. It's the tone, it's the body language, right? Kindness matters. That's all that matters in the end. And that no matter what, if you are trying your best, and I can recognize that because I know how hard it is to just open up, to be vulnerable with another person, to let someone see you not be the look at me, I'm all big, tough, and strong, and I'm gonna tell you, that's actually you're gonna receive the most disrespect in that manner, when your voice and your octaves are higher and you're pointing fingers down at somebody. If you're this person, you're gonna find yourself with less respect in your life than ever before. If you're the person who comes from here, people will respect you so much more. Because this here connects right there, right? Nobody needs to come down to this level. And just because the head's up here doesn't make it better or higher than the heart. The heart just sits here and goes, witness this. Maybe the head's actually up here so that it can witness the right, proper way to communicate and express yourself with other people. So that although it feels elevated, that mind, it's really just put on the pedestal, the head, to witness the heart in action. Because if the head were down here, it wouldn't get it now, would it? Just my own personal observation in this moment. So never put anyone on a pedestal. We're all here to grow and learn together. We're all on the same level. Find yourself a mentor, somebody you respect, honor, and appreciate, because that's key. You know, it's really important that when you're in a loving relationship with another person, that you don't put that other person on a pedestal, that you hold that space for them too. We're all human. And the only way we're going to grow is if we grow together. Not try to push the other person or try to lift the other. Just allow. There's a lot of times, I know for myself, I have a lot to learn. I'm constantly researching. I constantly want to get to know this and get to know that, right, Amanda, about gardening? I'm so grateful to have Tom around, because I know a lot, but I don't know a lot. Like, I've been doing it, and I grew up with our home in Maine where we had fields, and I used to constantly be picking wild berries, and, you know, I have a little bit of knowledge of, like, a little bit of everything. But I'm always willing to learn more. And so, just like with my yoga studio, with the people that I admire and I look up to, those are my mentors. Those are the people that I turn to when I need guidance, or my goddesses. Oh, honey, you're young. 50 ain't nothing. Wait till you get to 60 and you're going to be like, oh man, what, 50 with a breeze and I am looking fabulous, right? But the humbleness is knowing that as much as I know there's a whole lot more to learn, and I love learning too, right? I do. I've always been voracious with books, with looking and just seeing. You know, I love when I walk on this path with Buddy, who's laying out over here just perfectly, by the way. When I look along the path, I look down at the ground and I'm like, ooh, is that edible? You know, there's some really cool sea veggies I brought home one day. And they're really good, actually. I don't know what they are. I just know I ate them and they were good. But that's the cool thing about life. There's always something to learn. And you don't have to prove anything that you've learned to anybody else, because that's part of their process too. We don't need to go out telling everybody, hey, I just learned this, you should learn it too. Because that's kind of how life is, isn't it? We tend to get caught up in the, look, I figured something out. It's because that was my excited childlike self, that I thought, well, I figured this out. I don't want anybody else to suffer. So a lot of my life I was trying to help people. Like I just said, you think you know better for someone else, but I wasn't looking at my own stuff. I really just didn't want people to suffer. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the naivety in knowing that you want to help people, but the naivety is that they might not be willing to be helped. They may not be ready. And if anything, they push you away and reject you because that's not what they need, nor is it what they want. They may need to go through things the hard way. As much as I don't want to see anyone suffer, I have to honor and hold that space for people who choose to go down a different path. That's been a huge lesson for me. And I was having this conversation last week in my Beyond Addiction program where one of my mentors, she said to me, you know, I'm really proud of you. I've known you for a long time. And the one thing I can see in you is you don't offer advice like you used to. And I knew exactly what she meant. Because for a long time, because I knew my situation with the food and the finding out I was allergic to the gluten and the wheat, I wanted to save anybody who had ever suffered through that. Because IBS is no joke, and I didn't want anybody to feel the way I felt. So it was really easy for me to suggest, you should eat this and you should eat that. Me suggesting it didn't help. They weren't asking for it. If anything, they were more like, oh, who's this crazy woman? She doesn't know me. And they were very much caught up in their ego and their mind and their will, which is what happens when you're not ready or open or willing to listen to what someone else has to share. There's a lot of wisdom out there, but you have to remember that some of us didn't take it from other people. What makes anybody think that we should expect them to take it from us? So that has been a huge lesson for me, is to discern, not waste my energy trying to force myself on others. Hi, Dad. See, he's waiting at the house for me. I'll be there shortly. Forcing my will and my experiences on other people, totally a waste of my time. And it was humbling because I didn't realize that's what I was doing. It was really the first Beyond Addiction program I took over 2 years ago that woke me up to, oh my gosh, Dad, you're a great example, saying that I love you, but turning around and trying to get you to do things I felt were better for you. I had to step back and go, that's not love. That's conditional, because when we think somebody needs to do something a certain way, we're imposing ourselves upon that person. We're assuming that person needs to hear what we have to say to become a better person because we're not comfortable with them being in their discomfort. But you know what? We have to be comfortable even if they're uncomfortable. And even if we want them to feel good because it makes us feel more comfortable, that's really the bottom line, we have to allow them to go through the discomfort because they're going to grow the most that way. If they ask you for advice, they ask you for your consultation, that's beautiful. What it does show is they trust you enough to ask. And that's a huge key to communication, is trusting enough to ask, because that's showing vulnerability and courage to even speak up and say, I honor and respect and see all that you're doing. I would like to ask you some questions because I feel you're the perfect person to answer them. We don't just grow into these positions, right? You have to know for yourself your own personal truth and have your own experiences to know, I recognize in that person something that I'd like to also take into my life and learn from. And so we're not all necessarily mentors for one another, but there are different levels to it. Everybody has an opportunity to teach and to grow with one another. When I interact with somebody, I will learn, I will see myself in you, and vice versa. The clue is the awareness and the mindfulness in the moment that it's happening, if both of us are catching it. That's a critical point now, isn't it? And so I guess today's Friday reflection would be mindful of your communication. Notice if you're hypercritical up in here to yourself first, and see how it plays out in your engagement with others. Because the hypercritical, overthinking mind that is set the bar up here also puts everyone else out here at the same level too most of the times, right? We all deserve a lot more compassion than that. We're all human. We're all doing the best we can in the moment. And you can see someone else's shit, but doesn't mean you see your own. Hallelujah. Be humble enough. If you're willing to point out someone else's stuff, it may come back at you. Remember, those fingers are always pointing back. I love you all so very much. I really appreciate and honor every one of you. Thank you so much for sharing and supporting me, the group, Tom, Ridiculously Authentic. I really, really appreciate it. I know Tom does. We constantly talk about how much we're impressed, how beautifully you're all doing. Yeah, and this is the key, because that's why we created the group. It's really about communicating, engaging with one another, getting to know one another, and get to know yourself. Because even as you've seen, when something comes up for you, if you're triggered, what happens? you catch yourself baited and taken into it, right? So your own mind is your own trigger, your own bait. You have to discern and watch it. See it unfold slowly, because quite often that's exactly what's happening. Everything's in slow motion. The more you slow down and watch your mind and meditate, the more you're going to see it in action. You don't have to necessarily see it play out, but if you can witness it up in here first, you can save yourself a whole lot of suffering. Drop those attachments, people. I just want to be happy. I just want to play. Get your Friday, physical Friday on. Move that body. It is much colder than it looks, by the way. I have long black pants on. I'm going to do a little love spin boom because I love you, and then I'm going to say, TGI Friday. Let's see if I can do it over here. Can you see me? Ah. Boom. What? I love you.